city's exclusive Georgetown neighborhood.
There was a lot of gossip in Washington about Jack Kennedy having various affairs.
I think it was a flirtation, and at some point the flirtation became an actual sexual relationship.
Was it a random murder or a government hit?
No, for Christ's sake, no, certainly not.
For novelist David Baldacci, the case is as sensational as any bestseller.
This is one of the strangest murder cases I've ever encountered. It's a bizarre mix of sex, politics, secrets, and murder.
It's a brisk Monday afternoon in October. A stylish, middle-aged woman strolls along one of Georgetown's canal towpaths. Then, from behind, a man grabs and drags her towards the woods. Shots are fired. Within minutes, the woman's dead.
Georgetown is the high point of Washington social life. It's the priciest real estate in Washington, D.C. The movers and shakers all live there. And for me, like a setting like absolute power, you go where the money is. You go where the power and the political influence is. And that certainly is Georgetown to a T. The murdered woman on the towpath is Mary Pinchot Meyer, a wealthy and prominent Georgetown socialite and artist.
But what's most shocking is Mary's close and personal relationship to JFK. Her murder will become one of the most controversial and mysterious homicides in Washington history. Moments before the attack, 24-year-old tow truck driver Henry Wiggins arrives on Georgetown's Canal Road. He's responding to a report of a stalled car.
As soon as his truck, I would say within 1 minute, he started to hear the screams of a woman on the canal.
He told police he saw a Negro male dressed in a tan windbreaker, a golf hat, dark slacks and dark shoes, standing over the prone body of a woman.
Convinced he's just witnessed a murder, Wiggins races back to the gang and calls police. Robert Decker of the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department responds to the call.
Somewhere around 12:20, we got the call for a shooting. I knew the gas station well. We were there within minutes.
Police rush back to the scene.
They siren down Canal Road to where the Foundry underpass is, and they all three get out of the squad car and run up to the murder scene.
And there I discovered her body lying on the towpath. There was no life, that she was deceased. There was blood on her face, and there was an indication of on the left side of her head that she apparently had been shot. My prime duty then was to protect that scene from anybody coming in and disturbing it.
We know that she struggled because there was strong physical evidence murder scene of her blood all over a tree trunk, to which we can assume that she may have clung in her death struggle. There were 20-foot drag marks in the gravel on the towpath, which indicated that the assailant had attempted to drag her into the woods between the canal and the river.
Police frantic the woods along the canal. They quickly seal off possible exit routes, hoping the killer is still in the area.
There are small bridges that are leading to civilization. They close off the bridge down there, they close off the bridge there, and they begin a search of these grounds.
I feel pretty sure that the towpath was covered. You either had to go in the canal, or you had to go down to the wooded brush part, or go up toward Key Bridge and look for an escape up toward Key Bridge. But that was covered.
As officers tighten the net on the killer, Henry Wiggins tells the officers what he witnessed from his view of the towpath.
This Negro male was approximately 5 feet 8 inches in height, and weighed about 185 pounds.
The information is all units involved in the manhunt.
They start walking towards each other, kind of combing through the forest, looking for this man who Henry Wiggins has described to them.
As Detective John Warner proceeds down the railroad bed, he sees this young Afro-American man who is soaking wet. He's got twigs on his clothes. He looks a little disoriented. He's got a cut on his hand. Part of his pants is torn. And so Detective Warner decides to interview him.
The man identifies himself as Ray Crump. The police officer asks him what he's doing there, and he says, "I was fishing, and I fell asleep, and my pole fell in the water, and I just woke up."
As a storyteller, David Baldacci sees Ray Crump as a pivotal character.
Raymond Crump Jr. was 25 years old and the father of 5. He'd been in and out of trouble, though he had no history of violent crime. He fits the description of the suspect, and his story seems shaky.
Detective Warner wonders, why is this man wet? Why was he hiding in the culvert?
Detective Warner asks him a series of questions. Did you hear any gunshots? Did you hear anything funny going on? Are you aware of any other commotion? And Crump says no.
But Ray Crump did have a story to tell, one that would seem improbable to many.
Ray at that time told him that he had been fishing and that he had either fallen asleep and slipped into the river, or that when he awakened he realized that his fishing gear had slipped and he tried to retrieve it and then he fell in.
There was no evidence of any fishing gear on the rocks on the Potomac, which is where Ray escorted the officer. There was a bottle of whiskey, half drunk. There was a bag of potato chips, but there was no evidence of any fishing gear.
As Detective Warner considers Crump's story, he gazes up the embankment where Detective Bernie Crook and other officers are huddled on the towpath. They're only 500 feet from Mary's body.
At which point, Henry Wiggins peers over the embankment and tells Detective Crook, who's also on the scene at the murder, that it looks like the man he's... Detective Crook goes down the embankment, interviews Crump, and arrests him.
As a police officer, I've got a witness to say that guy has killed this woman, and he's in the vicinity, and I see him. I'm not doing my job if I don't detain this guy. They detained him, questioned him. His story was completely fuzzy. Got an eyewitness. Here come the handcuffs.
But is Crump the murderer? While he's transported to the police station, officers shift their focus to the unidentified victim.
Detective Crook examined Mary's clothing, and on the inside of one of her leather gloves, on her name tag, was the name Meyer etched into the tag itself.
Police search the phone book and find a listing for Mary Meyer. When they arrive at her townhouse, no one's home. But a neighbor suggests they try her sister Tony's house down the street. There they speak with Tony's husband, journalist Ben, who would go on to be executive editor of the Washington Post.
They told me about the fact that somebody had been shot in Georgetown crossing the towpath, and that there was some suggestion that it was Mary. I was asked by the police to come to the morgue and identify her body, and I did.
For police, it appears to be an impressive day's work. In a matter of hours, they've tracked down and arrested a suspect, identified the victim, and notified her family. But the easy part is over.
This was far from an open and shut case, and the prominence of the victim only added to the mystery. Even in Washington high society, Mary Pinchot Meyer stood out. She was an aristocratic person from New York. She was part of the Georgetown Social Club. Everybody of prominence knew Mary Meyer. And on top of that, she had concrete ties to the President of the United States, who had just recently been assassinated.
Coming up, just how close was Mary Meyer to John F. Kennedy? And is Ray Crump too convenient a suspect? 1964, the murder of wealthy Georgetown divorcee Mary Pinchot Meyer rocks Washington's social and political elite. At the National Cathedral, mourners gathered to pay tribute.
For the rich and powerful and politically well-connected, Washington, D.C. does really great memorial services. They really do. In fact, I just finished a novel where I had a memorial service. It's an integral part of the plot, set right in Washington, D.C. We pay great homage to, people of importance in this city.
But Mary's death is an especially shocking event.
Among the movers and shakers is Mary's brother-in-law, the Newsweek Washington bureau chief, Ben Bradley. Bradley would later go on to fame as the editor of the Washington Post, and the paper broke the Watergate. But in 1964, he's still getting over the loss of his good friend, Jack Kennedy, when his sister-in-law is also gunned down.
Mary's friends tearfully recall her beauty and intelligence. She's remembered as fearless and wild.
Her family was aristocratic and wealthy, but they also had a bohemian attitude, and the boys that she dated were from families like that. Harvard, Yale, Princeton. Those were the date weekends.
On one of those weekends, Mary met a young man left in and out of her life, the future president, John F. Kennedy.
JFK, like Mary, was from a very well-to-do family in Boston, not New York. He was a skinny, funny, gawky guy, and she was this beautiful woman, and she was on a date with someone else, and she may have danced with him and flirted.
Mary, I think, liked Jack, but she wasn't all that interested in him as a boyfriend. I think she kind of looked at him as sort of a wealthy playboy.
If Mary didn't see Mary in young Kennedy, she apparently saw it in Cord Meyer Jr., the man she eventually married shortly after World War II. Like Mary, Cord was from a wealthy family. A Yale grad with war hero credentials, his political star was rising.
If there was anybody in my generation that I can think of that looked like a promising leader, it was Cord Meyer. He looked to me as if he was going to be the spokesman for my generation.
But any of Cord Meyer's political aspirations took a sharp turn as approached by family friend Allen Dulles to join the CIA. Cord accepted the post, and the couple moved from New York to Washington.
Cord and Mary lived around the corner from where Tony and I lived, and Mary, in fact, had a studio in a garage behind my house, and so we saw a lot of them.
At this point, Cord and Mary began to socialize with a young senator from Boston named John F. Kennedy and his wife, Jackie. That's when John F. Kennedy re-entered Mary's life.
As Mary and Senator Kennedy renew their friendship, Mary's marriage is beginning to fail. She doesn't approve of her husband's work with the CIA.
Cord Meyer was the director of the Covert Action Division of the agency, which was involved in all types of covert operations, including a section that dealt with assassination or elimination of a threat.
After 13 years of marriage, Mary and Cord decide to divorce. Afterwards, Mary stays in Georgetown and reconnects with her bohemian artistic roots.
Most days, she would go to her studio and paint for several hours, and along about noon or so, she would take her daily long walk, which by and large took her down to the canal.
2 days shy of her 44th birthday, Mary takes her long walk. By 12:30, she's dead. At home, then Newsweek bureau chief Ben Bradley gets a call from Mary's closest friend, who's in Tokyo. She's just received news of Mary's death.
Ann Truitt was calling to frantically inform Ben Bradley that before she, Ann, left for Japan, Mary had asked her to take care of her diary if anything ever happened to her. And Ann was warning Ben to do this for her. At this point, Bradley was stunned. He didn't know that his sister-in-law had any secrets.
In fact, Mary does have an explosive secret. According to Mary's friends, in the years just before his death, Mary and President Kennedy were having a secret affair.
The affair between JFK and Mary Meyer lasted for a couple of years. At first, it was a friendship or flirtation. And at some point, the flirtation became an actual sexual relationship.
For David Baldacci, the revelation of a secret presidential affair makes the mystery that much richer.
In this case, there really are two complete different storylines. And if I'd written a novel where the police knew nothing about all the most important elements of the case, people would write me and say, that could never happen. And, if I do that and they do write me, I'm going to send them a copy of the Mary Meyer case and say, yes, in fact, it can happen. On the one hand, it's like a work of fiction, with conspiracies, intricately woven subplots. On the other hand, it's a simple story about a random act of violence.
But which is it? Hours after Mary's murder, the D.C. police investigation continues. Officers pay a visit to Ray Crump's home with a jacket and cap recovered from the Potomac. His wife identifies them as belonging to Ray. Searching Ray's home, they uncover what seems to be even more incriminating evidence.
Ray said that his fishing rod had fallen into the river, but the police found his fishing tackle at his home later that evening.
Police now believe they have an airtight case. An eyewitness, a matching cap and jacket, and a suspect caught up in lies. What police don't know is they're seeing only part of the puzzle.
This is where the story gets a little complicated. That same day, while officers are visiting Ray Crump's house, talking with his wife and finding his fishing gear, there is another search going on. In Georgetown, Mary's sister Toni and brother-in-law Ben Bradley are on a desperate hunt for Mary's secret diary. When they arrive at Mary's house, someone's already there. It's a plot twist as good as any I've ever written.
They're surprised to find the house unlocked, and when Jim Angleton is already there, obviously searching for something. And apparently, according to Bradley, Angleton shuffled his feet a little bit in embarrassment.
Angleton was a close friend of Mary and Cord's. Angleton was a big cheese in the CIA, and I guess was Cord's boss at one point, but was also a really dear old family friend.
James Angleton is one of the most mysterious figures of the Cold War. The legendary chief of counterintelligence for the CIA was said to be the most powerful man in Washington and have more secrets than even J. Edgar Hoover. The fact that he's looking for Mary Meyer's diary is frankly astonishing.
The first search of Mary's house was fruitless, and the Bradleys and Angleton left empty-handed. Later in the day, Ben and Toni Bradley went to Mary's little art studio, and they arrived there to find, again, James Angleton picking the lock.
And we asked him what the hell he was doing.
One of his nicknames was the locksmith, and there he was, again sheepishly breaking into their property.
After Angleton leaves, the Bradleys double their efforts. They turn Mary's studio upside down.
They found a little diary. She was painting abstract art with blocks of color, and most of the pages color, but about 10 pages of it had phrases of text that Bradley read and immediately recognized as being references to an affair with the president, the late President JFK.
And tell me about it.
I'm not going to tell you what was in it. It was a painter's book filled with, maybe 5 or 6 written observations that had to do with Kennedy.
The Bradleys are stunned by the revelation of Mary's affair. Convinced that her secrets will be safe with the CIA, they give the diary to James Angleton.
An icon of journalism handed this piece of evidence over to a member of the secret agency. There was going to be a trial of a man for this murder, and this was a piece of evidence, essentially, that he handed over to James Angleton.
So Toni gave the diary to James Angleton.
Yep.
I'm trying to get it as a statement from you.
Yeah, well, I don't want to give it as a statement from me.
In his 1995 memoir, Bradley insists that Mary's affair with Kennedy was a private matter. and not related to her murder. I think I can understand why he would want to just take this diary, give it to somebody to make it go away. He didn't want to see it on the front page of newspapers. He didn't want it to sully his sister-in-law's memory. You have to wonder, why did the CIA take such an interest in Mary's diary? Did her affair with the president have something to do with her murder? These are questions we can ask. Now, 1964, police don't know any of this. Their focus was solely on Ray Crump, who might or might not have killed Mary.
Without any knowledge of the diary, DC police continued their investigation into Mary's murder. Then, a second eyewitness comes forward. But can he be believed? When Mary Meyer is shot to death in Georgetown, it first appears to be a random act of violence. But if so, why are top officials of the CIA searching frantically for Mary's diary? What dark secrets does it contain about Mary's relationship with President Kennedy?
Among Washington insiders, it was common knowledge Kennedy was a womanizer. There were plenty of rumors about Marilyn Monroe and a string of other lesser-known companions. But those same Washington insiders say that the relationship between the president and Mary Meyer was something special, something that went beyond his other liaisons.
There was a lot of gossip in Washington about Jack Kennedy having various affairs. The press knew about it, but it was a gentleman's agreement to keep it out of the news.
But Mary Meyer was different. We went through the White House gate logs from this period, see her being signed in on at least 15 occasions under her own name, always around dinner time, almost always when Jackie was known to be traveling.
Mary Meyer didn't really need anything from the president. She wasn't social climbing by trying to be with him. She didn't need his money. She had her own independence.
JFK's general counsel, Meyer Feldman, told me that he thought JFK regarded Mary as an equal, in some sense. As much as a man of status and stature and time could allow a woman to be an equal. We do know that he wanted her around him on some pretty tense, historic days. She was the first person that he had in the office with him after Medgar Evers in Mississippi was shot.
I think the President Kennedy really came to appreciate and respect her opinion on a number of matters.
And Mary Meyer was for her strong opinions.
Mary Meyer wanted to have an impact on Kennedy in terms of turning him away from Cold War perspectives towards something much bigger.
The affair between JFK and Mary Meyer lasted for a couple of years. Certainly it was going on in 1962 and well into early 1963. I think Mary might have been trying to influence JFK in the direction of world peace.
You had the world's most powerful man coupled with a beautiful, accomplished, intelligent woman who I think had an agenda for wanting to change that most powerful man's worldviews. And because of that, it makes a great story. Who knows what might have happened, but on that day in November in 1963, everything changed. When President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Mary's dreams of world peace died with him.
Mary reacted to the assassination of JFK with shock and horror, like everyone else in the country. But she also had a personal relationship with him, so it was personally painful to her.
In the months after JFK's assassination, Mary has a growing sense she's being watched.
She had the sense, and she told people, that somebody was getting in her house and going through her things.
Mary was kept under observation by the agency, and particularly Jim Angleton's group and security. I had heard that they may have tapped her phones or kept her under surveillance.
Then, less than a year after Kennedy's death, Mary too is gunned down.
It's an incredible story, but you have to stop and remember. The Washington police had no inkling about any of this. They didn't know about Mary's affair with Kennedy, her diary, the CIA's search of her house. Their sole focus was on Ray Crump.
Their theory was that it was an attempted rape. He was a predator. And he had picked this woman, and she fought back, and he shot her to make her stop screaming.
Within days of the murder, a new eyewitness materializes, seemingly out of nowhere. An Army lieutenant by the name of William Mitchell reads about the case and realizes he was on the canal towpath at the same time. He remembers seeing the victim and the suspect.
Mr. Mitchell was running on the towpath, as he did often, and he said that he passed a black male following Mrs. Meyer on the towpath.
Lieutenant Mitchell's description perfectly matches the verbal sketch given by Henry Wiggins, down to the very last details of Ray's clothing. Police are more confident than ever that they've found Mary's killer. But as the Ray Crump case heads to trial, a fascinating character is about to add a new twin, the woman who will defend Ray Crump.
As a writer, believable characters, if you don't have them, you might as well not even write the story. Characters are the only way for a writer to connect on a human level with the reader. Dovey Roundtree is a character I would have been proud to create. She was a black woman at a time when Washington favored neither, and she was a powerful force. And as Ray Crump's attorney, she's about to rip huge holes in the prosecution's case.
Coming up, the case is stacked against Ray Crump, but will he be found guilty of murder, or is a shocking conspiracy about to be unearthed? With multiple eyewitnesses and strong physical evidence, prosecutors are confident as they get to trial, but they're not prepared for Ray Crump's shrewd and dedicated attorney, Dovey Roundtree.
Dovey dared, as a young lawyer at the bar, to take the cases of black clients before white judges, something that was not done in this town, and she prevailed. So by the time that she took the case of Ray Crump Jr. in October 1964, she was a seasoned, tough lawyer.
She always a driving need to help individuals who came to her office for legal assistance. She quite often would represent them at no charge.
Keep in mind, this was a time when the country was still reeling from Bloody Sunday in Selma, and the Voting Rights Act was not yet law. Dovey Roundtree was a black woman, but I would have to imagine there weren't many black female defense lawyers in Washington, D.C. practicing.
When Dovey and her associate meet with Ray Crump for the first time, can't believe he's accused of murder.
He appeared to be extremely timid. He was small and very reserved, so I just did not have the impression that he was the kind of an individual who could commit this kind of a crime.
He had served a little bit of time before for petty larceny. He'd been beat up once, I think fairly badly, which I think had left some kind of organic brain impairment.
There was a vulnerability about Ray Crump that clearly touched Dovey Roundtree. The fact that interesting characters are rarely all good or all evil.
Dovey and Jerry Hunter prepare for Ray Crump's trial by walking every inch of the towpath.
I tried to view the area in order to try to become familiar with that area and to try to get a feel for the crime, how the crime took place, the observation points for the witness, and to get a feel for the terrain.
They were reenacting gunshots by blowing up a paper bag and smashing it. Dovey would take the place of Mary Pinchot Meyer. Jerry Hunter would represent the man trailing her. So they were very publicly out at the crime scene.
And there, on the towpath, Dovey gets the feeling she's being watched.
She began to receive phone calls very late at night, usually after midnight. The caller would never identify himself. would just breathe into the phone and then hang up. And this was, of course, profoundly disruptive to the peace of Dovey's household. She became particularly concerned when she noticed that there was a pattern to the calls, that each time she visited the towpath, she would receive the late-night phone call.
Could someone want Dovey to back off? Despite her fears, she decides to stay on the case. Washington defense attorney Robert Bennett was at the trial. He would go on to represent President Clinton during the Lewinsky scandal. But at the time, he was the judge's clerk.
Crump's trial was a very big deal in Washington. It was, as you would expect, any murder case is significant, but given that Mary Pinchot Meyer was from a very prominent family, you know, and also I think it's fair to say the racial component.
Prosecutor Alfred Hantman gives an impassioned opening statement, framing the case as an intended sexual assault. He argues that when Mary Meyer screamed and fought back, Ray Crump shot her.
Dovey knew from the moment that Mr. Hantman gave his opening statement that he had simply developed a case based on theory. He had come up with a conclusion as to what had happened, even though there was no evidence. And the way that his case was his way of proving his theory of the case.
When it's her turn to speak, Dovey shocks the courtroom.
Dovey chose not to give an opening statement after Mr. Hantman spoke because I don't believe that she knew in which direction she was going to go at this point. And I think that what she was trying to do is to see what they had.
The strongest elements of the prosecution's case are the eyewitness accounts of Henry Wiggins and Lieutenant William Mitchell. Both have identified Ray Crump. But Dovey has done her homework. She finds a way to turn the prosecution's star witnesses to her advantage. It is courtroom drama at its best.
The prosecution's two eyewitnesses each recall that Mary's murderer stood 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighed about 185 pounds.
Ray Crump, according to the information on his DC driver's license, was 5 feet 3 inches tall and he weighed 130 pounds. He was a little slip of a man.
On the physical description of Ray Crump alone, she argued pervasively that the man that Henry Wiggins saw, the man that Lieutenant William L. Mitchell saw, couldn't have been Ray Crump.
It's a huge setback for prosecutors, so they return to their other argument. When police sealed the towpath area, there was only one suspect, Ray Crump.
That was such an important piece of their case that Ray Crump had to have been the murderer because he was the only person there.
To support their argument, prosecutors call a map expert as a witness.
The map maker, who got on the stand and testified with a 55-foot topographical map of the area on the courtroom wall, that all 4 of the exits from this area had been sealed by the police within 5 minutes after the murder.
It's the answer Dovey's looking for, the perfect setup for her next question.
Dovey asked him and said, "Well, sir, these are the official exits, aren't they?" And he said, "Yes, well, these are the exits that came from, our record of the maps, in my office."
The map maker himself had never so much as seen the area that he mapped, and the area was so heavily wooded that there were really hundreds of escapes. So it was ludicrous to say, as the prosecution alleged, that there was no escape.
Dovey Roundtree's strategy is clear. Attack and discredit the prosecution witnesses. When she presents her defense, it's simple and direct.
And she said, "Ladies and gentlemen, you've been sitting here since we started. This is my exhibit here. This is your exhibit. My exhibit A, or my single exhibit.
I give you this little man." And once again, she drove home the fact that at 5'3" and 130 pounds, he could not have been the man seen by the prosecution's witness.
The burden of proof is on the prosecution. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a very high burden of proof. I know that very well as a lawyer. All a jury wants is for someone to provide them with a hook to hang their hat on. That's all.
On July 1965, Ray Crump is found not guilty of Mary Meyer's murder. Despite the verdict, many still believe he killed Mary Meyer.
I thought he did, and the evidence seemed to me to be conclusive. I don't know what this guy was doing, wringing wet in the middle of the day in the Potomac River, fully clad. He went on to have a very successful criminal life in Washington.
He did go on to commit rape and arson. I met one of his ex-wives who had a scar on her neck from what she said had been an attempt to kill her with a knife.
After the trial was over and the verdict came in, I really thought that Ray Crump had gotten away with murder.
Dovey Roundtree, I think, was the perfect defense counsel for Ray Crump, and if Ray Crump didn't thank her after this was all over, then the guy was out of his mind, because she's life. If Ray Crump had been found guilty, he would have been locked away. The case would have been closed, and the murder of Mary Meyer would have been laid to rest. But Dovey Roundtree's successful defense allows the other story of Mary Meyer's death to take center stage.
Coming up next, a full range of conspiracy theories about Mary Meyer's death are about to emerge. Get more hardcover mysteries online. Looking back at Ray Crump's trial for the murder of Mary Meyer, crime novelist David Baldacci believes the controversial verdict was justified.
I think if I had been on that jury in 1965, found Ray Crump not guilty. The standard is beyond a reasonable doubt, and certainly there were legitimate questions whether Crump killed Mary Meyer. Today, I think there's a different and more interesting question. Are there reasons to believe Mary's death was something other than a random act of violence? Some say yes.
She was killed by 2 bullets, one in her head, one below her shoulder blade. It was clear from the coroner's report that this was a crime of extraordinary professionalism.
A close review of the evidence from 1964 shows no forensic link between Ray Crump and Mary Meyer. The prosecution's entire case was circumstantial.
There was no hair, there was no fiber, there was no evidence of blood stain of any kind on any of Raymond Crump's clothing.
And these blood stains are very potent. You can jump into water with a blood stain, but it doesn't wash away easily.
Police find no evidence of powder burns on Crump's hands.
Given that we know that Mary Meyer was shot at point-blank range, there would undoubtedly have been powder burns on the fingers and the hands of the person who fired the gun.
So there was no really physical evidence on Mr. Ray after he was arrested.
But why had Ray Crump lied to police about being on the canal towpath fishing? In her 2009 memoir, Dovey Roundtree offers an answer. Crump had been there for a liaison with a married woman named Vivian.
He was absolutely terrified that his wife would find out he had been cheating on her, and Vivian, for her part, was absolutely terrified that her husband would beat her to death if he found that she was cheating on him. And they had gone to the canal, a place where he had fished a number of times, and they had sex and drank. Apparently, Ray drank quite a great deal. After the sexual activity, he fell asleep, he told Dovey, and he slid off the wet rocks into the Potomac River and climbed out and looked for Vivian. It was nowhere to be found.
Dovey Roundtree's investigator located Vivian, and she corroborated every detail of Ray's story, although she never testified in court.
Vivian balked. Vivian was simply terrified and refused to do that. And after that conversation, Vivian disappeared.
Now, once you begin to doubt Ray Crump was Mary Meyer's killer, you open the door to a range of alternate theories. Given Mary's established connection to Kennedy and the fact that James Angleton sought out her diary, conspiracy theorists suspect CIA involvement. And in recent years, some other intriguing questions have also surfaced.
Doubts have been raised about the identity of the second eyewitness, Lieutenant William Mitchell.
By the time of the trial, Mitchell was now saying that he worked full-time at Georgetown University. There was no record of any William L. Mitchell ever having taught there.
Even more intriguing is the home address Mitchell gave the court.
Mitchell's address was actually a known CIA safe house. That is, when certain covert operatives came into Washington for a stint of work or whatever, they were often given cover at this apartment complex. He had a phone number there, he had an apartment number there, but there was no record of him ever being there. It was clear to me that Mr. Mitchell was not who he said he was.
Gets the help of investigator Roger Charles to look into Lieutenant Mitchell's military background. Rogers searches Pentagon phone directories of the period.
There was no other record of him anywhere in the Army, and yet he claimed to be, at the time, a lieutenant colonel in the Army, and was identified in the court record as a second lieutenant in the Pentagon. He only shows up in the fall of 1964 directory. He's not there in the summer directory of 64. He's not there in the winter directory, 64. So that's fair.
Janney also takes a second look at the story of tow truck driver Henry Wiggins and the report of a disabled car that brought him to the towpath.
After the murder is over, sometime within the next couple of hours or so, the stalled Nash Rambler disappears, and there's no record of anyone ever having fixed it. Henry Wiggins testifies that he never fixed it, but it disappears mysteriously.
Interviewed years after the murder, Wiggins said he'd always had a feeling that he had been called there to be a witness.
The car was placed at the scene in order to bring Wiggins there to be witness to the murder. The murder actually takes place 1 minute or less as soon as they arrive.
To make sense of the idea that the CIA wanted Mary Meyer eliminated, you have to consider the whole web of conspiracy theories surrounding the Kennedy assassination. They range from the interest to the improbable, but the overriding theme is that the CIA and the military-industrial complex were at odds with Kennedy and could not control him, so they orchestrated his assassination. If you buy into that, then it takes just one more line to connect the dot to Mary's murder.
On September 27, 1964, the Warren Commission report on the assassination of President Kennedy names Lee Harvey Oswald as the lone assassin. Just 2 weeks later, Mary Meyer is murdered.
Cord Meyer, close to death, told author David Heyman, when David Heyman asked who he thought had killed his wife, Cord said something to the effect of, the same sons of bitches who killed John Kennedy.
To me, it's very obvious that the CIA was connected with the murder of Mary Meyer.
No, for Christ's sake, no, certainly not. Why would the CIA want to do it? I don't get that. Never mind, I don't get it, and I don't believe it, so.
Do I think that the CIA was capable? Yes, absolutely. There are a lot of things about that time that we don't know still. I believe Ray Crump was the guilty man.
After Ray Crump's acquittal, the investigation into Mary Meyer's death was closed. To this day, no one else has ever been charged, and the case remains unsolved. And what of Mary's much after diary?
The diary? Nobody will admit to knowing where it is. Lots of rumors. We don't know exactly what Angleton did with the diary. He may have made copies of it. He may have stuck it into a vault and shown it to no one. He may have passed it around. Ben Bradley says that he and Tony asked for the diary back.
Once Tony got the diary, she destroyed it now. How soon after she got it, she destroyed it, I don't know. But I know she destroyed it, and I know she destroyed it in front of Cicely Angleton.
Whatever secrets there were in Mary's diary end up in the ashes of a family fireplace, and, like so much else about this case, remain just beyond our reach. Either way, it's a remarkable true story. It really is a complicated piece of polished fiction, even though it's actually true. And it allows people to come to their own conclusions, their own conspiracy theories, as wild and crazy as you want to come by. But I think at the end of the day, it shows that truth really is stranger than fiction, because I don't know how anyone could ever make this stuff up.